Alrighty, we're in. Yes. Alright. Yeah. Good to have you all. Welcome into the abode. Definitely, I love the space with them who come and ride in the space, to come connect in the space and be part of the space. And you might ask why? We need a unity more than ever. We need a connection more than ever. Those that start recognizing levels of connection, of where you're at, what's your latitude, longitude, right? What's your space? I remember there's a scripture in the New Testament talks about understanding the length, depth, breadth, and width. This would be knowing thyself in a higher from low, deep diving to higher heights, right? To the lowest areas, to the higher heights. We have to experience certain aspects that, because the duality of the poles always are going to give you the opposite of the opposite, always, right? So this is really what this is going to be about. I told you we would breadcrumb from the end of yesterday. We'd breadcrumb to I always throw you some breadcrumbs. I'm looking for building the pattern recognition and decoding to see if you guys would kind of start aligning it, practicing it. So I'll even throw it out there. And I said my last video would be a decode of the former. Yeah. So my former video, I did the decoding even the decode, right? I talked about that, decoding the decode. And what that was really all about was decoding, because I got asked a few times, was kind of thrown at me with the opening ceremony, and some things I had said on a video and to the individual friends of mine about the ceremony. And I had mentioned on the video, right, with the ceremony, that this is a ceremony, which means it's a ritual. Come on now. Ceremony is connected to your your cerebellum within your brain, and it's a ceremony, meaning it's connecting like a ceremony, right? A ceremony, a connection of like when you have a marriage, there's a matrimony, right? There's a connection of oneness that you're doing. And in this case, it would be doing something as a ritual way to make it work by using the laws that they do, and how it works. So so I got kicked another video, and I had looked it up. I'm not going to share it. We're not going to go exactly right into that one again. We're not going to carry over from the last video. I said we're going to go into something that's more applicable of within and experiences within. But I just wanted to tell you, leaving that, I was able to locate the 1992 ceremony. Definitely interesting, and it makes me know more and more that I bet if you go back to these past ceremonies now, you'd find a whole lot of stuff that was put out there that now you would recognize and know and decode, and you would see that the possibilities. This has been going on for a long time. Many people are just so veiled up they can't, hidden in plain sight or hidden in eye view. You always hide something in front of somebody where they could actually see it. Has always been the best hidden factor. But the best hidden factor that the veil or your connections of yourself and your ego and all that which creates attachments to your ego self will veil you up to not see past it, because the ego's always going to fight to be right and live in the position of almost being the leader, or being the leader of the soul or the self, this aspect. And I'll even say this: the ego is neither good or bad. It is something that comes in and immediately connects to the reality that it is, in whatever form that you give it space to take. And when most of us are not taught how this works, or adjustments and we see the manifestation of the ego. And then the ego creates such attachments of veiling yourself up, and such a let me live, let me be the boss. The fear factor comes with the ego, like the fight or flight, right? Comes with the ego, and then what happens with the ego, right? So we're going to talk about this. This is actually for all you guys who went through it, experienced it, and it's called the dark night of the soul. It is something that many people have talked about for a long time, those who have awakened, and the meaning of it. And the dark night of the soul represents when somebody goes through their process of awakening, and they go to this place where they feel certain things. They might feel imbalanced, they might feel lost, they may feel depressed, they may feel all this stuff. But what's happening is almost like a shuffling of the deck of your ego. As you shuffle the cards of your deck, right, of the ego, now what's happened is there's an awakening coming through this, and it's a shuffling of the deck. And as you shuffle the deck, you're starting to recognize parts of you that you did not recognize before. You're starting to recognize there's more than what I thought. And then the ego starts being revealed unto you, and then you start seeing what the ego's press is. And then when you start seeing it, you start seeing the attachments, and you go through this process, and it can be a very dark night. I would even call it, this is equal to when I hear me saying the deprogrammer, learning to deprogram would be the same as the dark night of the soul. When you go through this change of belief systems, start to realize they're not serving you. They're connected to a part of you that's egotistical leading, and you're really, as you start doing this, the ego wants to shout and let it all out, because you're ruining the ego who thought it was the leader. You're actually taking the deck, reshuffling it, as you're getting space for the reshuffling of your soul, spirit, understanding, your intuition being opened, and all the inner aspects of yourself being reshuffled to go into a full structure out of the disoriented, unstructured, or disorganization of being inverted by the ego. And it's called the dark night of the soul. When you go through this, I remember when I went through it, and think about this. Many people will go into, I went through it once, and they're like, okay, I already covered that, I don't need to do it again. There will be many in your continuous growth of revisioning and having to reshuffle the deck of the dark night of the soul. It's just usually always the initial one is the toughest, because this is a reforming of self. This is, like I said, you're reshuffling the decks of what is and what should never be. And all this very much comes into play that make you feel alone, depressed, dejected, chaos within. Because many times you had a foundation you thought was your foundation that you're realizing it really isn't. And then the shuffling of the deck is revealing as the cards change, as your mindset and the structure of your inner is starting to build space for you to start growing in your consciousness, and you're realizing that things within you were not so, that are false illusions, and you start separating the illusions that were connected to your ego, based on the ego always wanting to live, always wanting to be the boss man within you, and the fear factor that it is, because this is really going to kick up the fear factor. The fear is going to come out because the ego's really in fear now, fight or flight, because they knows that the structure is coming in to destruct or to change the pattern recognition within you, and to evaluate you as you really start to see that the things that you used to believe no longer hold true to you, but it's a process of you feeling like you're in the funk. Many of us have had that. It's called the dark night of the soul. And one thing I know for me, I had that initial experience, and I had it again. And I've had it multiple times. But once you start having it again, you're already refurbished, rebuilt, put yourself in order. So now it isn't such a drastic change, because you're knowing the structure has to change through the experience of your dark night of the soul. Where the first time you had it, it was like, oh my gosh, I feel so rotten and bad, and I don't know if I'm coming or going. That which I used to put in a high space, even my foundation, it's been upheaved. It's not a good foundation, nor is it the truth anymore. And then you're dealing with this in your soul, and it can be chaos, it can be alone, it can be loneliness, it can be depression, it's challenges in you to bring out the activation of the other side of you, which goes into the enlightenment stage of consciousness starting to grow and starting to take its place, and then the order starting to be sent in you of origination of spiritual stuff. So the upheaval is tearing down an old foundation that you have. And I mean, going in and just the bottom of the barrel, the lowest aspect of yourself is being upheaved, which is tough. But when it happens later, when you go to different levels, it's not as drastic because you've already upheaved, and you already know that things weren't the way you are, and you're ready for to get rid of certain stuff that was there before, because you already know this is an enlightenment state now, not a destruction state, because the destruction definitely is there. It's destroying that which is not. That's what should never be, right? Reminds me, I said that and it popped in my mind now. That's actually a song, that which is and what should never be. Actually, Led Zeppelin 2, which is and what should never be. And you start looking at that, and the restructure of a temple not built on sand, built on not having a good foundation, is what's being that whole thing. What we know of the parable about having a good foundation is actually part of uplifting that bad foundation that doesn't hold and cannot establish, as being upheaved. Bam! You're taking that out. You're upheaving it. You're rebuilding that which is low, that esteemed itself high, is being just fractured again. There's the fractals again. Why? Because you're going to take and build the true foundation is starting to descend out of ascension within you. And this process can happen multiple times. It should, unless you stop it. And the only thing will stop it is the ego. And one of the process of stopping it is in the ego would be this one thing would be, I did it once, I don't need to do it again. That means ego even was able to thwart its way within that, your conscious movement the first time. The ego was still having breath of life, of having control. But I'm telling you, the dark night of the soul happens multiple times to you. It just, as you get better at it, and you allow it, and it's not as difficult. But the first time, it's like a hurricane. It's like a tornado upheaving. It's like an earthquake cracking. It's like a tsunami just knocking everything in its way out. And pretend those things of everything I meant is actually false sense of self is being removed. So I got, we're gonna go in on this. I got some stuff to share with you about this. So we're gonna go in. We're gonna share the screen, and we're gonna go in on it. All right. So immediately, no, yes, and yes. All right. So immediately, let's go down some more because it's up here. So how many of you ever heard of this? The feelings come in this. The ego, what is being taken out is the ego feelings of emotions that are disturbing, disconnecting, appearing loneliness, even going into depression, even feeling like you're losing everything, even losing your mind, even losing your spirit, and all these aspects of it, right? So let's read the overhead. The dark night of the soul is a spiritual experience that has involved feelings of loss, despair, and disconnection. That's what I mentioned. It will make you feel disconnected because you're coming awake, because you've been slumbering and sleeping in the illusionville and the illusions and the soul and the dark side of the ego. Remember, ego's neither good or bad. The ego It serves its purpose, but it needs to be in line with its purpose. I would use it even into the point of, if your ego is your taskmaster, it's brutality. If the ego serves you, then it can be beautiful because it's serving you, not bossing you, if that makes sense. But the things that when it bossed you, its foundation is the darks has to be removed, and you have to go through this processing, which is darkness feelings, right? The significant transformation and questioning when the foundations of one beliefs and understanding the world are shaken up. You're shaking that stuff up. That's what it's telling you. You're shaking it up. It's being earthquaked. Like I said earlier, it's being shaken, and it can't stand because the foundation is not the truth. You're meeting your true foundation of your true self through to the dark soul of the night. And this will link you, and it's a continuous growth of self going far, and things will mimic itself. Some things will even mimic it as you experience it that seem, because every aspect of the dualistic plane has this. There's a positive and negative side to it, each side. You could be an ego and just totally negative, that it's not serving you, it's whipping your tail. Or it can start serving you as it's getting into line, realizing the structures change and you really don't have the end of control anymore. Let's read some more. Some say the dark night of the soul is a period of purification and surrender to the divine will, and that's exactly what we're talking about right here. It is a purification that you're going through. That's why these feelings are evident of the lower self, of feeling not connected, feeling despair, loss, soullessness at times, not trusting. All these things that were really built on the attachments, as you're getting revealed, it's really getting you to humble yourself as the divine will of your higher self comes in and starts refurbishing the new house that is coming. And it's learned as you learn and go through this to let go, right? To let go. And the purification is like a cleansing, right? You're being purified. Fire purifies. That's why they always want to tell us, well, you go to hell and burn in fire. That really means purification. It's a cleansing. Fire's a perfect cleansing. Fire will cleanse you. Sulfur's a cleansing. I've mentioned before what you do with sulfur when you have gas. And if you're at a place and you have gas, and you know what goes with having gas? Light some sulfur. That thing will evaporate, suck it up immediately, and it'll be gone. Where all the tingly, smelly potpourris just mixing good smells with bad smells, where the sulfur goes in there and purifies the stank. This is on all levels of consciousness, though. That's a lower part. Now, even through the process of it doing, there's a purification going on, right? Surrendering one's beliefs. That's what, I always mention here of about getting rid of unserving, attached belief systems that aren't true. That's why they're beliefs. Anybody can believe anything. Doesn't make it fact just because, I got a belief. Your belief could be a lot of stuff that doesn't manifest as truth, because truth sets you free. Belief systems don't. They'll indoctrinate you. That's why they're used to indoctrinate you, and you get confused. And when you attach to them, you're just riddled with almost like octopus layers of octopus arms of attachments trying to grab a hold of you. You get one arm off and there's another one coming to attach you again. And let's say these are illusions, attachments from the egos trying to preserve itself. So purification, surrender to the divine will. So your divine, the wheel within the wheel, or in the scriptures is the wheel within the wheel is actually the will within the will. It's that lower level will submitting to the divine will, which we see here. Now you're operating out of your divine self in that will, which will bring forth, instead of karma, you'll start the processing, getting rid of karma, so you can unleash your purpose, which would be dharma, right? If you will, but watch this. How many of us went through this? I went through this multiple times, and the first one is tough. The second one somewhat was tough too, because the first one I had wasn't so tough because of my experience. I just, I mentioned it, refer back to an old video when I told you what changed me was an experience I had with a brother that was divinely like came in and done, where I was changed immediately with abundance of the spirit of wisdom revelation came upon me and pounded me. And then immediately I started seeing things different, and I had no problem saying, oh, you're not truth anymore. Bye bye. Oh, I found out this is truth and this core, this belief. I'd be like, I still do that to this day. I have no problem once I know a truth of something, of getting ready a belief system. I don't really struggle with it no more. I just say, vamonos, get out of here. For me, that's what I do. But what it was for me, really, I did have it. My having it at that beginning in the early 90s was, I noticed that I would go through despair, and I called them my trials. When I mentioned in that video, I'd have a revelation and it goes to the next level. I started seeing things different. Then I noticed I'd go through some hard, to me, very trials, and I associated the trial with the revelation, like suffering going with what you get. But now I see it was just a dark night of the soul. Things were being removed because at this one 24-hour period, so much was removed in belief systems. Every revelation I got removed a belief system, right? It was quite, I had this experience, which refer back to my experience videos. Maybe they're 1 and 2 where I talk about what happened, but that would be it. But my next time, so I went through many, but the next one really was the one that sticks out is 2012 through 2013, when I left even the metaphysical Christianity, when I had this guy named Lynn Hayes came to the ministry to speak for a 3-day weekend on a Father's Day weekend. And he brought out something that I kind of knew and was really using in the place of other characters in the Christian faith of Old and New Testament, that they were allegorical. But one I kind of held on, but I would talk to certain people that wouldn't judge me, that we would have these discussions, and I would say, hey, if all these patriarchs are actually allegorical, like it says in Galatians, that would mean so is the main character in this New Testament. He's an allegory too. When I really found out, when he came in and showed me, and he brought to our service, to our church, he showed me the whole thing of the cross and the years and the sun and how it tied in. And when I really got it, that the Son and the 12 disciples were the Son, S-O-N, and the 12, the 12 zodiac signs, then I really had made a change and said, I can't even do this metaphysical the way I was doing it. And I actually left the organization of people that I knew in what I mentioned in past videos, the kingdom message, and that allowed me to go to the next level since that. And we're looking 12 years, which has been increasingly, very quickly. That was a dark night of the soul, and this is what happened in that dark night of the soul. I'm like, man, kind of the very thing I thought was my foundation in this aspect was Jesus, the Christ, the person, but I realized by removing this, it no longer was. And in my talking to myself, my higher self, I said, well, I thought this was my foundation, but I guess it's not. But I felt lost. I felt a loss or some despair about that. Like, what is my foundation? And immediately my higher self is, no, what you got rid of is that which is not. You're going to find out what true foundation is now. And that happened. But also I had gone through this before. Once you keep going through these, the more you come equipped and have your decks have been reshuffled already, it comes very much easier. But let me quit talking about experience because we got a lot to read. So, surrender, right? Away from illusions of fear and ego, and realign one's values and connection to the divine. And that's what's happening. This can help pave the way for one's life purpose, Dharma. Right? Dharma. Like I had said, going from egotistical to Dharma. Others say the dark night of the soul is a divine pruning process that cuts away that which is not needed to make room for the new growth. I see that too. That makes a lot of sense. You're getting rid of the illusions, which are really belief systems, which are really painful lies that you've allowed yourself to be told and believe in. But it's all fear-based to hide the fear that the ego really has. So, but this is really unveiling yourself to yourself. Some say the dark night of the soul is not a punishment, but rather experience initiated by God and bring forth to the greater state of spiritual maturity. And I love that, because remember, did videos on that. You haven't went through a secret society, maybe you haven't went through a Gnostic school or any kind of secret society that would lead you to a higher truth, but you've had an inner spiritual initiation, and this is what this is. This is what this is saying. And I've talked about having these inner initiations going forth. I have videos not long ago about this, the initiation process, what one would have, right? The process cutting away, bring forth people to greater spiritual maturity, can lead to a breakthrough in faith, and people can come out more mature, trusting of God, higher self, the goodness and presence of your reality and what you're doing and saying and experiencing. The dark night of the soul is a stage of final complete purification, being purified, marked by confusion, helplessness, and can be even feeling stagnant and a sense of withdrawal of God's presence. And this is my experience over the decades, was when you feel these feelings, that dark night of the soul is actually telling you you're not separated. This is getting you ready for preparation for the next, can I say it, upload of consciousness. Yeah, it's really what it would be. So right now, this is some really heavy stuff. That's why it was leading you from that video. I said, there's some things I'm saying here, some crumbs, because this is going to be what you're going to need to understand as things keep manifesting, as the pressure's on in the outers, right? Because we see it. With every aspect we can go on the outers, we need to be in this place of knowing ourselves to the greatest level and activating ourselves, right? So next level, we're gonna do something. I got a little short video for you, and this short video definitely is connected. It's about the dark night of the soul. All right, not a long one.
Dark nights of the soul are one of the most sacred rites of passage that a person goes through during a spiritual awakening. So today I'm going to be explaining exactly what a dark night of the soul is, and at the end of this video I will share with you its deepest gift. A dark night of the soul is when we're going through a period where there is a deep level of transformation happening to our ego and our self-concept. This arises through our belief systems that hold together our identity and what we identify with being thoroughly challenged to the point where our foundation is being shaken to its core. This is meant to reorganize and restructure our being into a higher level of consciousness.
And that's what for me, I use the word, I like how restructuring, I mentioned restructuring, but I called it shuffling the deck, changing the cards. It's a restructure of the deck, right? The cards. Yeah, this is very much a must of the transformation being transformed.
And in order for this restructuring and reorganization to occur, we need to go through a massive ego death. And that's what a dark night of the soul is. It's what comes into the scene when we need to have our ego challenged to its very core in order for us to get in a state of surrender. And so it's also used as an instrument from the higher self in order to maneuver us and push us back into a corner, so to speak, in order so that we have no choice but to surrender. Because it's very rare that a being who's identified with ego is going to just willingly give up all of their belief systems that create their paradigm that they're operating from. The ego clings to anything that it can use in order to build its security and its level of safety within its own self-concept. So a dark night of the soul introduces a massive crisis of the psyche, because what it's doing is challenging the very foundation that the ego uses in order to create its identity and keep it safe within its beliefs.
That's heavy. So it's really all out assault on your ego that everything that the ego in its places did and built within you from your belief systems to your thoughts, figuration. It's doing a banger job within the house, like I said. Awesome.
Systems. So a dark night of the soul is when the psyche is in a state of crisis because what it's doing is having all of its belief systems that the ego uses in order to keep a level of security and identification with its internal and external environment. And it gets completely tossed into a state of disarray and chaos because what's really happening in this stage is that we're entering an inner void. Entering the void is inherently uncomfortable to the ego because when we're in the void, we're not in a place of knowing. We're not in a season where we have the answers or feel secure about our worldview. All of the things we use to keep our self-concept intact are becoming unhinged in a dark night of the soul, and we are being awakened into a higher level of consciousness. And because of that, there's a lot of unknown and there's a lot of expansion occurring. And because we're in the void, this is a sacred rite of passage that we enter during a spiritual awakening journey. It's just not honored as such because our culture only honors the milestones that we see when it has to do with reaching a certain age or getting married or graduating. So external events that are important to a specific culture or society is what gets honored and celebrated. But the internal events that a being goes through in their own transformation of consciousness isn't typically viewed as a rite of passage, even though it's a very powerful one on this journey. A common misunderstanding about the dark night of the soul is when we think that we only go through one during a lifetime.
Wow.
We might go through a very powerful dark night of the soul as we're entering higher states of consciousness and deeper levels of awareness into our reality, but those don't typically stop. What ends up happening is that we don't experience the dark nights of the soul as severe or intense as when we first started them initially. And that's because a dark night of the soul helps us grow in our level of consciousness by allowing us to become masters of surrender. That's one of the major gifts that a dark night of the soul gives us.
Wow. So you talk about getting a master's degree. It's teaching you to surrender, masterfully surrender the ego's will, the lower will, to the higher will. Wow. And what she was saying was this is like an initiation, right? A passage, rites of passage, which is like a graduation. Celebration.
When we're more mature and evolved along our process, we're able to surrender deeper. And that's normally not the case in the beginning of our journey, because what's happening in the beginning of our journey is that we have really volatile catalysts that pretty much force us into seeing some sort of higher version of what's happening in our internal and external world, or something in our awareness that we currently didn't want to incorporate because that would have been too much for our psyche to handle. A very fragile mind does not like to be challenged. And so they'll have cognitive dissonance, which is a fragmentation of our psyche, and they'll stay and remain in a state of dissonance rather than go through the very intense and uncomfortable challenge of being able to look at all the different opposing beliefs that we hold within our being and then start to consolidate them. So another way of looking at a dark night of the soul is a state of consolidation that we're forced into. It's where we're faced with our own hypocrisy.
Wow, this is a revealing of self to self, really the ego and the lower self, and challenge you at that root of it, because you have to dig up the root, right? Which is another parable. Go to the root and dig up the root, or if you don't dig up the root, it comes back? The weeds, the stickers. This will, if you don't take on the challenge, you'll go back as we see many that we know we dealt with, we see how thick the cognitive dissonance is. This is actually streamlining you out of that. Wow, heavy, good stuff.
Or outdated belief systems and programming that now we're having to face in order to shed that version of our skin. And because of that, we have a lot of reorganizing going on, both on an energetic level and a cellular level. Things are being called into question during a dark night of the soul that are pivotal to our internal reality and to our external reality. Even our mediocrity is being challenged in this phase of consciousness, because a lot of the times we are aware of when the ego is in an inflated and exaggerated state of being. But we're less aware of when our ego has built its entire structure and identity around an inflated sense of self and a subordinate sense of self. And so a dark night of the soul doesn't discriminate as to what type of ego structure it's dismantling. It dismantles anything that's no longer serving us. Because of that, a dark night of the soul is in correspondence with the initial stage of alchemy, which is called negrero, or otherwise known as calcination. And during this phase, we are thrown into the proverbial fire. And what this is doing is reducing us to our barest form, because the ego holds on to all of it.
Remember I mentioned earlier, the purification of the fire. This is what she's talking about. The fire is a cleanser, and it's cleansing your soul. And you lose the dogma that is destroying you that came from, right? Because that could have been your dogma and your egotistical parts of you and your belief systems, which it was for many of us. I can vouch for that. But when you see true fire is about the cleansing, make you bare to your soul so it can cleanse out those negative aspects that are not truth about you in the illusionary realm of belief systems and thoughts.
Its self-concept, all of its different paradigms, all of its internal confliction, and all of its neurosis. And because of that, there's a purification by fire, or a trial by fire that we're undergoing in order for us to be reduced to our ashes. And this is what we're going to be working with in the next stage of alchemy. But depending on the level that we surrender during this phase of being inside the void, will also determine our level of being when we exit this phase. We're always going to be in stages or in seasons where we're more confident of our belief systems than other stages or seasons. But the ego doesn't want to ever go through having to surrender their belief systems, because the ego's in a state of fear when it's that fragile. So dark nights of the soul are able to reconstruct our level of being so that we're able to be more flexible and surrender, but also wiser and resilient. It's enormously humbling to be in a stage of not knowing and to surrender the...
Man, when I really look at myself, there's some things she said that really, I can identify with. The resiliency of this, the pattern as you experience these things, you realize certain things happen before this happens. There's an order to it. Like I said, you go through your low part, not even when you feel like you're not on it, certain seasons. And I always knew when I was there that this was connected to actually trying to upgrade me would be the next move when I let go of it.
Things that got us up to this point of our journey. But doing so, we might be able to actually come out the other end of the void and still resonate with some of our belief systems. The point is, are we going to be so attached to our ego's fragility that we're not able to ever be in a state of openness to possibilities or to paradigms and awareness that we won't let penetrate our egoic structures? And because of this, it takes a great spirit to be a willing participant in their ego's own demise. Because the ego is neither here nor there. It's not a bad guy, it's not a good guy. It's just our self-concept. It's how we interface with reality and with this dimension. But when it becomes inflamed, it contracts into a state of fear. And then that becomes the way that it relates to the world, from a level of fear and attachment. In fact, it's so afraid of surrendering that it will trick itself to believing, oh, I already went through a dark night of the soul. I'm out the other end. Now I'm at the top of the summit. And so it will even deceive itself in believing that it has to go through another round or another level of awakening. So when we're in the void, it's open-ended. It's directionless. And because of that, we bring our projections into this space, and we'll project onto the void whatever it is that we think is going on. So if we're in the void and what's actually happening is that we're going through a massive awakening where the higher self is penetrating our psyche and our body mind, we might interpret that as depression. Or we might interpret that as feeling very blocked in life and stuck, where we don't know how to move forward or proceed or what course of action. Or we might feel panicked or anxious. And all of these different ways of relating to being in the void are how the ego is responding to the fact that it's going through a massive death. But the greatest...
Wow. So it's like the funeral of the ego. That's why you feel this and go through these processes, right? the ego's dying out to another lapse of power, that it's really misinformed power, because the ego should not be in its context in that level of power or having a usurping authority. But when we don't know, that's what happens. It will do that. It'd be like a weed. If you don't cut your weeds and go on your neighbor's lawn, or even your own process, having weeds on your own lawn, then it ends up being could be a problemo, right? This just, yeah, really good stuff. I really appreciate you all, and I really appreciate these videos, and I appreciate being able to use Sarah with the alchemy in these videos.
This gift that the dark night of the soul provides us with is allowing us in entering a state of flow. Because when we feel blocked or challenged, that's also a part of our awakening. However, it's a crucial phase where we're supposed to be in a state of deep integration and reorganization. That's going to lead to a stronger and more resilient state later on, or what I call a season of knowing. We're going to have seasons that we move through in our spiritual awakening journey, where we're more confident in our belief systems, and seasons where we're not. And this is absolutely fine to go through, and that's how the higher self has us contract and expand our bandwidth. So the greatest gift that we're receiving during the dark night of the soul is the expansion of our being's bandwidth, so that we can encompass.
Hear that? Bandwidth. Where else do we hear bandwidth with? Right? In your computer system, your Wi-Fi. The bandwidth is actually the amount of space you can use in the communication in the core of Wi-Fi and energy, frequency, vibration, movement, or routing, right? And we have that, because I tell you, we're the originals. Don't buy the AI as being evoluting past us. It can't. That's the problem. Your bandwidth can increase as you increase.
And embody more of the essence of our higher self. And we can't do that if we're always relating from the world at our current level of paradigm and operating from our current belief systems, both about our internal sense of self and both about our external world. Because that stagnant energy calcifies, and then it becomes an egoic structure where the light of our higher self can't penetrate.
Wow. It becomes a what? Egoic structure. Would that be like an egregor? When folks create an egregor, and we know it's really an aspect of not really producing that which is beneficial for everybody or increasing, but it's increasing one by decreasing everything else in egregor. Find out egregor. I'll do an egregor one day. If you have never heard of an egregor, but I see egregor and ego being so close now when she was saying that.
Our being. So the deeper we're able to allow ourselves to surrender into the unknown is also inversely what allows us.
That's totally against what we're taught and what we think. Surrender to the unknown, the void. Surrender to the that's heavy. Think about that. In our thinking, especially when we're under that gun of being that's not a thinking. You want to surrender to the I'm sure of. That's foundational, what you need to do. I can't surrender something I don't know. But the reality fact, to go to the next level, you have to surrender to the void, to the unknown. Bam, that's a whole different degree. That's getting degrees right there. That's true fire. In degrees, remember, are also fire. Well, you say how? If you cook, 360 is hotter than 300 because the degrees are hotter, right? And also the degrees represents, in another way, part of alchemy, degrees represents also amount of knowledge you have, right? That's why they said, the degrees through school, right? First grade, second grade, third grade, graduate, all that stuff is really a type of the reality of what we do by the more you know, 360 degrees of knowledge. How much have you apprehended out of the 360? Powerful.
To expand our bandwidth. And that expansion doesn't feel good. But that's the medicine that we're given during a dark night of the soul.
So the dark night of the soul, the expansion don't feel good. This is, like I've said a few times, this is not for the faint of heart. It's not. Bandwidth expanding through the pain that you go through as you're expanding, but it's actually a medicine.
Soul. It's to expand our level of awareness so as to raise our frequency and therefore raise our vibration. Only our sincerity will be able to determine that. And so, the more sincere we become along our journey, nothing can stop us. The less sincere we are, nothing can help us. I hope this has brought light.
That's heavy, right? The more sincere you are, she said, right? The more sincere you are, it expands. The more less sincere you get all the help you need. The less sincere you are, there's no help. Wow. That's one pole to another pole. So sincere, that's got to be a word of my day too. I got to add sincerity. Yeah. I got to write that in a second, but man, this is the next level stuff. That was why I was talking yesterday about, but left you with these crumbs. This is us doing the work and understanding, because our power is within. Our power is activating ourselves. Our power is being able to stand in these places that you don't know what all abilities that you can unleash that are especially in the times of needs for yourself and for others in your family. You guys definitely have a great day. Much love, much appreciation. I appreciate you. Appreciation is expansion, right? Depreciation, it would be the same thing as, hey, if you're willing, we'll expand. If you're insincere, can't help you. If you're sincere, you get all the help you need. You guys have a great day. Much love. Definitely share. Comment. Share. Awesome.